The season's final ball unfurled beneath 100 crystal chandeliers, each one scattering shards of gold across the swirling gowns and polished marble. Music shimmered through the hall like a promise, but for Lady Aloan Hartwell, the sound might as well have been distant thunder. She stood near a column draped in roses, her gloved hands folded with quiet precision, trying not to betray how small she felt in a room built for braver souls. Aloan had always moved gently through society, as though fearful of disturbing water already troubled. Tonight, however, the waters needed no help. Whispers rippled the moment she stepped inside. "She is pleasant enough," someone murmured, "but hardly memorable." "A wallflower's fate," another agreed, "unless some miracle delivers her a champion." Aloan pretended not to hear, but the words threaded through her ribs, tightening one by one. Her mother had urged her to hold her head high, yet the ballroom brimmed with shimmering beauties who sparkled effortlessly under the chandeliers. Next to them, Aloan felt like a painting left in a dim corridor. Fine in detail, yes, but unseen, overlooked, unattended. Then the room shifted. A stillness rolled across the dancers like a sudden hush in a cathedral. Heads turned. Fans paused mid-flight. Even the orchestra seemed to falter. The Duke of Ravensworth had arrived. Asher Ravensworth moved with the measured confidence of a man accustomed to being observed. His dark hair was neatly parted, his shoulders broad beneath a tailored coat of midnight blue, and his gaze, when it swept across the ballroom, struck with the clarity of steel-catching light. Every mother with an eligible daughter straightened at once. Every young lady found fresh radiance in her smile. He was the man every family wished to claim, the man every gossip column worshipped. And until this moment, he had never so much as looked in Aloan Hartwell's direction. Yet now his stride cut through the crowd as though the path had been carved solely for him. And when he stopped, he stood directly before her. "Lady Aloan," he said, bowing with impeccable form, "would you grant me this dance?" A gasp lifted from the onlookers. Aloan felt the floor sway. She could not fathom what force, fate or error, had placed her in the Duke's attention, but the weight of 100 envious eyes pressed against her. Her voice wavered, though she fought to steady it. "If it pleases your grace." It was the first time anyone had ever envied Aloan. The sensation stung and dazzled in equal measure. Asher led her onto the floor just as the orchestra began a sweeping waltz. His hand at her waist was firm yet courteous, and for several trembling seconds Aloan could scarcely feel the ground beneath her slippers. The Duke's posture was perfect, his movements effortless. He guided her through the steps with a grace that might have convinced any observer they were long acquainted. But Aloan knew better. His expression, though polite, bore a distance she could not read, the reserve of a man fulfilling a duty rather than indulging desire. Still, as they turned beneath chandeliers that scattered firelight across his collar, she felt something dangerously close to hope. It lasted no more than a minute. From the edge of the floor, Lady Clarice Harcourt watched with narrowed eyes. Clarice, famed for her beauty and hunger for attention, had pursued the Duke for 2 seasons. To see him dance with Aloan was an unforgivable insult. She lifted her fan, the very picture of elegance, though spite sharpened every motion. When the dance ended, Asher bowed, thanked Aloan, and stepped back. And in that breath of space, Clarice glided forward, whispering with the precision of a blade, "My dear, you ought to be cautious. Fortune favors you tonight, but rumors travel quickly." She extended a folded note, its seal already broken. "I thought you should see what has begun circulating." Aloan opened it. Her stomach twisted. The handwriting was a mockery of her own, penned with cruel skill. "Your Grace, I shall wait near the East Gallery at midnight, where we may discuss the necessity of a union beneficial to both our families." The implication was unmistakable. Desperation, manipulation, a trap. "That is not mine," Aloan whispered, a flush rising to her cheeks so fiercely she feared she might ignite. People were watching. Murmurs began, sparked by Clarice's theatrically concerned expression. But before Aloan could speak further, The Duke approached again, his gaze flicking to the note with unreadable calm. "This is spread," he said quietly, "already too far to contain. I did not write it." Eloan insisted, though her breath came thin and fragile. "I believe you," he answered, but his tone carried no warmth. "Only duty." He turned to the room, where curiosity thickened the air. Then, in a voice that carried clear as silver, he said, "To ensure Lady Eloan's good name remains unstained, I shall make my intentions known. I intend to offer her my hand." Shock rippled like a physical force. Clarice went pale. Eloan felt the world tilt. Everything too bright, too loud, too swiftly spiraling beyond her control. "Your Grace," she murmured, barely able to breathe. "You cannot be compelled." "It is decided," he said, and for the first time his eyes revealed something. Weariness, perhaps, or resignation. Whatever lived there, it was not affection. The announcement spread through London within hours. By morning, the papers christened her the Duke's accidental bride. By afternoon, her family was drowning in congratulations. By dusk, Eloan felt more like an artifact than a woman, claimed, displayed, judged. The wedding came swiftly. In the cathedral's gilded silence, she stood beside a man whose face might have been carved from stone. He spoke the vows with perfect clarity, as though reciting a legal document, while she forced each word past the tightness in her throat. When it ended, the congregation erupted in approval, oblivious to the bruise forming behind her ribs. Only once they were sealed inside the carriage did the Duke speak, his voice low but unyielding. "Lady Eloan, I shall be plain. Tonight you will sleep alone. This marriage was necessary, but it shall not pretend to be anything more." The sentence struck harder than any whispered scandal. Rain battered the carriage roof like fists of disapproval, and Eloan stared at the blurred world beyond the window, realizing she had traded public humiliation for private abandonment. When they reached Ravensworth Manor, servants bowed as though welcoming a queen, yet she felt like a ghost passing through her own life. Her wedding chamber glowed with candlelight, soft and golden. She stood beneath its warmth, solitary in her gown of ivory silk, and felt the crushing weight of a marriage built on rescue rather than choice. Outside, the storm thrashed the manor walls. Inside, silence wrapped her like a shroud. And then she saw it, a single pressed violet resting on the pillow, left by a hand unknown. The first crack in the story she thought she understood. Ravensworth Manor greeted Eloan each morning with a hush so complete it felt almost deliberate, as though the walls themselves observed her with guarded curiosity. The servants moved with soft steps and lowered eyes, unsure of how to behave toward a duchess who had arrived under dubious circumstance. Eloan bore their uncertainty with her habitual composure, yet the silence pressed on her, deepening the sense of exile she had carried from the moment her husband abandoned her on their wedding night. She wandered the manor's vast halls in search of distraction, finding instead an emptiness that mirrored her own, until a small object left upon her writing desk disrupted the stillness entirely. It was a single violet, pressed flat and framed by a folded card. The card bore no signature, only a brief line in elegant script, "For courage unspoken." Eloan touched the violet with reverent fingertips, bewildered by the inexplicable tenderness hidden in the gesture. No one in the manor knew her favorite flower, and certainly not the staff, who maintained a respectful distance. For a trembling moment, she wondered if Asher himself had placed it there, then dismissed the notion as fanciful. The Duke rarely remained in the same room with her long enough to exchange more than obligatory pleasantries. Yet the token stirred a faint warmth beneath her ribs, a fragile sensation she scarcely recognized. She placed the violet carefully into her journal, uncertain whether the act preserved memory or invited hope. She closed it slowly thereafter. Days drifted by with the muted pace of snowfall, and though Asher remained distant, more tokens began appearing. A volume of poetry bound in deep green leather, a music box that played a melody she once hummed absent-mindedly while passing through the corridor, and a silver bookmark shaped like a quill. Each gift arrived without explanation, placed where only she would find it. The anonymity unsettled her, not for fear of wrongdoing, but for the intimacy implied. Someone watched her closely enough to understand her quiet preferences, perhaps even her longings. That thought alone colored her solitude with a peculiar brightness, though she dared not name the feeling. If Asher was not the giver, then who within the manor possessed such knowledge of her heart? London, however, proved far less gentle. News of their strained union reached the city with indecent speed. The papers printed speculative caricatures of her, some portraying her as a scheming nobody, others as a pitiable mouse trapped in a gilded cage. Eloan read none of them, yet the whispers found her through letters and acquaintances. Even the invitations that arrived bore the faint scent of scrutiny, as though each hostess wondered whether the Duchess of Ravensworth could endure the glare of society without crumbling. When a winter soirée invitation requested both her presence and the Duke's, apprehension coiled within her. Asher had not attended a single event since their wedding, and she feared becoming the subject of amusement should she arrive alone on that unforgiving night. To her astonishment, when she approached Asher with the invitation in hand, he did not refuse. He merely regarded her with composed neutrality, the sort that revealed nothing yet hinted at deeper storms beneath. "We shall attend," he said, as though the decision inconvenienced him no more than choosing a necktie. Eloan nodded, offering thanks he did not acknowledge. Their carriage departed at dusk, its lanterns casting wavering light across the quiet streets. Inside, silence settled between them like frost on glass. She could feel his distance, precise and measured, yet not hostile, merely impenetrable. She wished she understood how to breach that stillness, or whether he desired such intrusion. When the manor lights dwindled behind them, she felt the evening balancing on a knife's edge. The soirée unfurled in glittering splendor, chandeliers trembling with candlelight, gowns shimmering like ocean tides beneath the music's rise and fall. Eloan stepped into the room with cautious grace, conscious of the dozens of eyes that turned toward her and the Duke. Some regarded her with curiosity, others with open skepticism. Asher offered no arm, yet he did not abandon her either. He hovered near enough to imply connection, far enough to deny intimacy. Clarice's presence slithered into view like smoke. With a practiced smile, she approached and murmured barbed compliments, each coated in honeyed malice. Eloan endured them with quiet dignity until one remark, "A duchess in name is not always one in truth," sent a faint chill racing along her spine through the crowded hall. Asher appeared at her side at that precise moment, his voice low yet carrying a warning edge. "Lady Clarice, you overstep." The murmurs that followed swelled like shifting wind. Clarice retreated with feigned innocence, but her eyes burned with wounded vanity. Eloan felt her pulse quicken, unsure whether Asher's intervention sprang from duty or something more complex. He offered no explanation, only a measured glance that flickered with unreadable intent. Later, as they stood near a frost-laced window, he adjusted the shawl slipping from her shoulder with a gentleness that startled her. His hand brushed hers for barely a heartbeat, yet the warmth lingered long after he withdrew. The touch stirred a question neither dared voice, suspended like breath held within silence in that moment. When they departed the soirée, the carriage seemed smaller than before, filled with the unspoken weight of the evening. Rain slicked the windows, blurring the world into streaks of silver, and Eloan found herself watching Asher's reflection more than the passing streets. His posture remained impeccably straight, yet something in his stillness had shifted, as though her defense had unsettled a hidden fault line within him. She gathered courage to speak, but before she formed a single word, he reached for the blanket beside him. His hand hovered halfway toward her before he withdrew, closing the moment like a door between them. The gesture, aborted yet unmistakably tender, carved a new question into her thoughts, one that throbbed with dangerous possibility as the manor lights appeared. Snow dusted Ravensworth Manor that evening, softening the sharp edges of its stone facade with a veil of quiet white. Inside, However, tension thrummed like an unsettled chord. Eloan walked the corridor toward the drawing room, her pulse still unsettled from the soiree's events. Asher's defended words echoed in her mind, impossible to forget, though he had retreated into silence the moment they re-entered the carriage. She had thought the manor might soothe her, yet each shadowed hallway felt more watchful than usual, as if the house itself sensed the tremor in their fragile marriage. She paused at the doorway, steadying her breath before stepping into the glow of firelight. Asher stood with his back to her, one hand braced against the mantel, the other loosely gripping a tumbler of untouched brandy. The fire cast restless amber across him, creating a flicker of vulnerability she had never seen before. He did not turn at her approach, yet she sensed he had been listening for her. Their silence felt charged, not cold as before, but expectant, like snowfall waiting to break into a storm. "You defended me tonight," Eloan said quietly. Her voice was steady, though her hands trembled beneath her gloves. "You did not have to." Asher exhaled, a sound edged with weariness rather than irritation. Lady Clarice spoke out of place. "Allowing such cruelty to stand would have been beneath us both." "Beneath us," she repeated, tasting the distance embedded in the words. "Is that the only reason?" A long pause unfurled, long enough that she nearly apologized for asking, nearly retreated into her old habit of quiet endurance. Then Asher set the glass down with slow deliberation and turned toward her. His expression was unreadable, but his eyes betrayed a flicker of something deeper than duty. "You have been subjected to too much," he said, "and I have done little to ease it." "It is not ease I expect," she replied. "Only honesty." A muscle in his jaw tightened, as though honesty were a blade pressed to old scars. He looked away briefly before meeting her gaze again with new determination. "Very well," he murmured. "You want truth? Then hear it plainly. I have kept my distance because I feared what closeness might cost." The confession struck her like a gust of cold wind. "Cost?" she repeated. "From me? From myself." His voice lowered, turning rougher, more human. "I once gave my trust too freely. The woman I loved seemed sincere, gentle, attentive, devoted. Yet the moment she realized my title was secure, she sought influence elsewhere. She used every kindness I offered her as leverage. When her betrayal surfaced, I discovered I had been nothing more than a rung on her ambition." He paused, swallowing words that fought for release. "I vowed never again to mistake affection for truth." Eloan felt the ache of that vow, as though it had been hammered into her own ribs. "So you believed I sought the same?" she whispered. "I believed," he said softly, "that I could no longer believe anyone." She took a small step toward him, compelled by something beyond caution. "Then what are the tokens? The violet, the poetry, the music box. Were those not gestures of a heart attempting to reach?" His composure faltered, a crack splintering the cold veneer he worked so hard to maintain. "You noticed," he said in a low, almost disbelieving breath. "How could I not?" Emotion wove through her words. Each one spoke to something private within me. Someone had to know me well to choose them. "I feared direct affection would overwhelm you," he confessed. "After the wedding night, after my cruel declaration, I cannot approach you without shame. The tokens were all I could give while I searched for the courage to give more." Heat rose to Eloan's throat, not from embarrassment, but from the fragile wonder his admission awakened. "Asher," she murmured, his name falling from her lips with cautious familiarity. "I never sought to bind you. I never wanted power over you. If anything, I feared you more than you feared me." He looked startled. "Feared me? Your indifference felt like a verdict," she said gently. Each silence was a judgment I could not challenge. "I thought you despised me." He moved then, subtle but undeniable, crossing the remaining steps between them until only a breath separated them. "I did not despise you. I despised what I might feel if I let myself care." The room seemed to shrink around them, the firelight drawing their shadows together on the carpet. Eloan could hear her heartbeat, steady yet trembling with an emotion too large for the moment. "And now?" she asked, scarcely daring to breathe. His eyes softened, the steel melting beneath a shimmer of uncertainty. Now I fear I've let distance do more harm than closeness ever could. She reached out, slowly, offering her hand with the barest tremor. Then let us not be strangers in our own marriage. He hesitated, a fraction of a second, a breath held between two lonely souls, before taking her hand. His touch was warm, hesitant, profoundly human. Their fingers intertwined like threads drawn toward mending. The fire crackled beside them, marking the fragile beginning of something unspoken yet undeniable. Her pulse thrummed where his thumb brushed her knuckles, a silent question in that small motion. They leaned closer, drawn not by impulse but by the quiet gravity of confession. His breath mingled with hers, warm against the winter-cooled air. For a suspended moment, the world narrowed to the space between their lips. Eloan felt the promise of a kiss, gentle, trembling, transformative, hover like a snowflake unwilling to fall. But Asher drew back an inch, eyes pained, voice a whisper scraped raw. I cannot offer you a broken heart. Not yet. I would not wound you with what I cannot repair. You wound me more by retreating. She confessed, tears threatening but unshed. His gaze swept her face, lingering with longing he dared not voice. Then he released her hand with agonizing slowness, as though the parting cost him. Wordless, he stepped back, creating space that felt colder than the snow outside. Later, when she returned to her chamber, she found the green poetry book resting upon her pillow. But this time, a page was marked, one containing a single underlined verse. Where fear builds walls, longing carves the first door. And for the first time, she wondered whether that door was beginning to open. The storm had softened by morning, but the remnants of last night's turmoil clung to the air like an accusation. Eleanor woke with the unsettling clarity that comes after a dream one cannot fully remember, yet cannot shake, a sense that something long restrained had begun to uncoil. The house was unusually quiet, as though every wall were listening. She rose, dressed, and descended the staircase with the steady resolve of someone who knew the day demanded a reckoning she could no longer postpone. When she entered the drawing room, she found Adrian already there, standing by the window with his hands braced against the sill. His posture suggested he had been awake for hours, perhaps wrestling with the same unrest that had plagued her. He turned at the sound of her footsteps, and for a moment, neither spoke. The silence between them felt delicate, like frost that could shatter at the slightest touch. You left the celebration early, he said finally, his tone neither accusatory nor casual. Just observant. Too observant. And you didn't, she replied, trying to anchor her voice. You seemed occupied. His gaze held hers, unwavering. Occupied with the consequences of your brother's scheme? Yes. The whispers will not die easily. Eleanor winced. The scandal Felix had ignited by spreading half-truths about her, and Adrian had spiraled far beyond what even he had intended. Rumors now suggested clandestine letters, secret meetings, stolen promises, none of which were true, though each rumor carried a sting because of what she herself had suppressed. She clasped her hands together, feeling the tremor she had hoped to hide. I should have stopped him, she whispered. I should have spoken the moment I realized what he'd done. Adrian stepped closer, not touching her, but the nearness was enough to disrupt her breath. You were protecting him. I can understand that. But it leaves us with a choice we cannot avoid anymore. She looked away, terrified of where that sentence led. A choice. A choice about whether we let others determine what exists between us, he said, voice low, deliberate, or whether we speak for ourselves. Her pulse surged. The conversation was veering into territory she had spent months avoiding. She felt the weight of it, heavy, luminous, impossible to ignore. Adrian, you know why I've stayed silent. I can't risk. You risk losing yourself by denying the truth, he interrupted gently, and perhaps losing me as well. The words struck her with unexpected force, cracking through her caution. She had always imagined Adrian as unshakably patient, a quiet constant in her life. But now his steady composure showed a fracture, one that revealed a depth of longing she had not dared to hope for. Last night, he continued, After you left, Felix approached me. He said you were too ashamed to admit you cared for me. Her breath caught. He had no right. Perhaps not, Adrian said. But it doesn't change the fact that it wounded me more than I expected. Because I realized I no longer want to guess what you feel. She pressed her fingers to her lips, as if that could restrain the emotions rising in her. Shame, yes, but also yearning, fierce and unrelenting. The room felt too small for what pressed between them. You want a confession, she murmured. I want honesty, he corrected. From you. From myself. From both of us. Eleanor's steps were slow as she crossed to the sofa, sinking into it with the exhaustion of someone finally cornered by her own heart. If I confess what I feel, she said, everything changes. It already has, he replied softly, taking a seat opposite her. We are merely pretending otherwise. She closed her eyes. Images flashed, his hand steadying her arm at the summer fete, his laughter on the terrace, the quiet understanding in his eyes when her world felt suffocating. Every memory she had tucked away now rose like a tide, demanding acknowledgement. When Felix started the rumors, she said, opening her eyes again, I was furious. But a part of me feared he had seen the truth I was too cowardly to name. Adrian's breath faltered, almost imperceptibly. And what truth is that? That I have cared for you far longer than I should have, she whispered. The confession landed between them like a spark. Adrian leaned forward, elbows on his knees, searching her face with an intensity that warmed and unsettled her at once. Do you regret saying it? No, she said. Only the months I wasted refusing to. A slow, relieved exhale escaped him, as though a weight he had carried alone had finally been shared. But the calm that followed was fragile, brief, shattered by a sudden knock at the door. They both stiffened. Adrian rose first, smoothing his expression into neutrality as if tucking their moment into a hidden pocket. Eleanor stood as well, heart still pounding. She did not know whether she wished for the interruption to vanish or to spare her from the vulnerability she had just embraced. The door creaked open, revealing Mrs. Harland, her family's housekeeper, pale and unsettled. Miss Eleanor, she said, voice thin, your father requests your immediate presence in his study. There is news. Eleanor swallowed. What kind of news? Mrs. Harland hesitated. It concerns the rumors. And your future? Adrian's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. Eleanor felt the world tilt. The fragile peace she had found cracking under a pressure she feared she was not prepared to face. She stepped toward the door, but before she crossed the threshold, she paused, gripping the frame as though steadying herself before a plunge. In the hallway beyond, a murmur of raised voices drifted toward her, carrying a name she wished she had misheard and a verdict that could unravel everything she had just dared to feel only. Eleanor followed the raised voices down the corridor, her pulse thundering in her ears. Her father's study door stood ajar, light spilling into the hallway like a warning. She forced herself to step inside, Adrian trailing behind her before the door closed of its own weight, sealing them in with whatever fate awaited. Her father stood behind his desk, stiff as a soldier at attention, while Felix paced the length of the rug like a man preparing for judgment. You've caused a storm we can no longer contain, her father said without preamble. His voice, rarely unsteady, shook faintly now. The rumors have reached the Earl of Harrowmere. He demands clarity on your relationship with Mr. Everhard. Eleanor went cold. Demands. He insists, Felix cut in, guilt sharpening his features, that if Adrian does not intend to marry you, then the lies I spread, however unintended, constitute an insult to his family. And to yours. Adrian stepped forward. This is absurd. Rumor should not dictate Eleanor's fate. And yet it has, her father said sharply. I have been given two choices. Announce your engagement to Mr. Everhard immediately, or face public censure that could destroy this family's standing entirely. The word struck like a hammer, final, uncompromising. Eleanor felt as if the room were tilting, the floor sliding away beneath her feet. She looked to Adrian, searching his face for an anchor, for reassurance, for anything that could hold her steady. But what she found was something far more devastating. Conflict. Deep, tortured conflict. "Adrian," she whispered. He looked at her father, then Felix, then finally at her. When he spoke, his voice trembled with restrained emotion. "I will not be coerced into anything that risks harming you." Her father scoffed. And yet, refusing could harm her far more. Felix turned away, unable to meet her eyes. Eleanor felt the pressure closing in on all sides. She took a slow breath, then stepped toward Adrian until only inches separated them. "Tell me what you truly want, not what honor demands, not what fear dictates. You." He closed his eyes, as though her nearness made the question unbearable. "What I want," he said, voice low and raw, "is you. I have wanted you since the day you stood in the conservatory defending your wretched hydrangeas as though they were soldiers in need of rescue." His eyes opened, blazing with honesty. "But I will not take you through force of circumstance. I want to stand beside you because you choose me, not because a rumor cornered you." The confession sent something luminous and terrifying through her chest. She cupped his cheek, feeling the tremor beneath his calm. "Then hear my answer clearly," she said. "I choose you. Not because of scandal, not because of pressure, because my life feels smaller without you in it. Because the world sharpens when you enter a room. Because I am done hiding." A single breath passed between them, suspended, sacred. Then the Earl burst through the door. His presence filled the room like a winter storm, severe, cold, impossible to ignore. His gaze swept over the scene. Eleanor standing close to Adrian, her hand still on his face, both of them framed in a posture that erased any doubt about the nature of their connection. "So if it is true," he said, voice steel-sheathed. Her father stiffened. Felix froze. Adrian turned to face the Earl, but did not retreat from Eleanor's touch. "It is." The Earl's lip curled. "You would tie yourself to her? After the disgrace, her family's chaos, after—" "Enough," Eleanor said, surprising even herself. She stepped between them, her spine straight, her fear burned clean by the fire of what she felt. "If you speak of disgrace, remember your son helped create it by refusing to accept Adrian was never promised to me. Your insistence on controlling every heart in this county is the only true scandal here." A stunned silence fell. The Earl's face darkened. "You dare?" "Yes," she said plainly. "I dare. Because I will not be used as a pawn in your pride, nor will Adrian." Her father inhaled sharply, but he did not interrupt. Felix looked at her as though seeing her for the first time. Adrian stepped beside her, shoulders squared, calm but resolute. "I intend to marry her, and not because you force my hand, because she is the woman I choose." Eleanor felt the declaration ripple through her, steadying her, strengthening her. The Earl stared at them, fury and disbelief warring across his features. For a moment, Eleanor feared he might strike Adrian, or her, or lash out in some irreparable way. Instead, he exhaled sharply, an icy, defeated hiss, and turned away. "Then you do so without my support," he said. "Consider yourself severed from my estate, from my name, from everything I have ever provided." "Then I am finally free," Adrian replied, simple and sure. The Earl froze, stunned by the answer, then left without another word, the door slamming behind him. Silence followed, heavy, fragile, trembling with aftermath. Eleanor's father lowered himself into his chair as if the weight of years had suddenly settled upon him. Felix wiped a hand over his face, ashamed but strangely relieved. Eleanor reached for Adrian's hand. He took it immediately, his grip firm, grounding her. "What now?" she whispered. He smiled, soft, exhausted, but shining with something unmistakably hopeful. "Now," he said, "we build something of our own, not from scandal, not from obligation, but from truth." She leaned into him, feeling the future unspool, uncertain but bright. And for the first time, the uncertainty felt like freedom.